How do you sustain an empire? Don't get this question confused with something serious like Greece or Rome. I'm talking about something far, far dumber. I'm talking about the most profitable media franchise in the world. Pokémon has had an iron grip on the world since the 1990s. Between its ever-expanding games, trading card collecting, and general relevancy as a cultural symbol, Pokémon, the brand, is valued at an amount larger than the GDP of some small countries. Yet, like it or not, the success of Pokémon is entirely predicated on the RPG games that made them relevant in the first place. Trading cards can fly off the shelves, and the anime can do numbers on the 18 different streaming services that it's housed on, but they are nothing without the concepts established in these core games. Everything comes from them, and therefore an insurmountable amount of pressure follows the developers of these games to make them hold up over 20 years later. Kind of. See, at least in Game Freak's early days, which is the studio that's responsible for every Pokémon game ever made, I believe they probably were feeling this pressure to make every game somehow new yet somehow familiar compared to the previous entries in the franchise. And it's that same pressure that I'm sure Junichi Masuda and Ken Sugimori, the two masterminds behind the early Pokemon games since Red and Blue, were feeling in the year 2009. See, 2009 saw the release of Pokemon Platinum, the latest combination game of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl in Generation 4, and it saw massive success. But now the franchise was at a turning point. Spanning nearly 12 years and 12 separate games, the franchise had now attracted an immense number of players, both players that had been playing since Red and Blue in the original Game Boy, and new players like me who were picking up the game for the first time on the DS. Masuda and Sugimori realized that they needed to keep this momentum going, and they needed a powerful entry to maintain this franchise's success well into the future. They knew the power of the Nintendo DS, and they wanted to create a second generation of games for this device. And each Pokemon game up to this point was based on a different region in their home country of Japan, but they hadn't quite explored anywhere else yet. Until that summer. Masuda was planning a series of Pokemon concerts around Japan, and was looking into other places to show people the music of Pokemon on a live stage. He considered New York, and then he thought about it more, and more, and more. He didn't end up pulling off the concert, but he also couldn't get the idea out of his head to set this new Pokemon game in New York. It was perfect. It was the perfect region to follow up Sinnoh. So for inspiration, Masuda flew to the Museum of Modern Art, the MoMA. It was here that he looked at the paintings of Matisse, Van Gogh, and their contemporaries and was inspired. Not entirely by the art itself, but the physical space it was housed in. The MoMA is in a beautiful building on West 53rd Street in New York. The rooms are differing in size, each built to house the various works of art held within. Some long enough to fit a car, some high enough to fit a building, and some small enough to fit the perfect painting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This video is not a video about modern art. This video is about the most important Pokemon game ever made. Pokemon region design and architecture, much like video game sequel design in general, is all about progressive expansion. Red, Blue, and Yellow focus on establishing the general feel of a Pokemon game and the protagonist's journey through the Kanto region. Gold, Silver, and Crystal added a day-night cycle to the new Johto region, explored new parts of the region that weren't connected by land, and revisited the previous Kanto region. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald were about expanding the region horizontally through too much water, thanks IGN, and Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum expanded the verticality of the Sinnoh region through improved 3D shaders and the depth of field on the DS, and also quite legitimately through areas like Mount Coronet. And all of these regions were based on existing regions in Japan. But Black and White in Generation 5 were completely new. There were new Pokemon, a new region, a new story, new characters, nearly no continuity from any of the previous games. It was a huge gamble that more or less kind of backfired. Having no familiarity with any of the older generations kind of alienates your existing player base, but it was a decision that game director Junichi Masuda made on behalf of the older players by starting fresh with a mature story. He wanted to make a Pokemon game for everyone, so that everyone started on the same playing field, regardless of experience with the franchise. In an interview with Nintendo Power, he asked questions like, does it seem too cute? Is the writing too off-putting? Is it too childish? He summed that all up by saying that he wanted to change these things to make Black and White more appealing to older players. But it also did connect with a younger audience, as evident by it being the 6th best-selling game on the DS to date. But Black and White, at the time, was a failed experiment to make a more mature Pokemon game. But many, including me, appreciated the game for the contributions that it brought to the franchise years later. But what I feel like so many people missed on the first go-around is that so much of this maturity is in the region itself. Masuda and Sugimori had a clear vision to translate New York into a landscape painting that spoke to players through the medium of a Pokemon game. And the glue that holds that region together is the architecture. The buildings scatter the canvas and are so wonderfully detailed and constructed as if they are constructed by the real people in the game. The cities jump out from the larger painting of Unova, and the entire Unova region acts as a representation of how much the Pokemon franchise has changed, how unique its story is, and where it was heading in the future. Before I begin the rest of the video, I want to express that, number 1, I am not an architect, and number 2, I am not an architecture student, but I am a Pokemon franchise admirer and someone who loves looking at cool buildings. I'm also just going to be talking about Pokemon Black and White 1 in this video, not Black and White 2. I do know how cool the Marine Tube is in Humalao City, and also the changes that they made to the towns from the first games to the second games, like the Pokemon World Tournament and Driftvale City, and many more examples. And finally, I want to express that you should subscribe to the channel. Okay, I'll stop. So you might be asking, why do you care so much about buildings in Pokemon, Jack? They're just organized piles of rocks if you just think about it for a couple seconds. First off, you make organized piles of rocks whenever you go to the beach, and I don't criticize you. And second, buildings quite literally house everything that makes a Pokemon game great. They house plot details, they hold bits of lore here and there, and they connect the region that you travel through together. They are the spectacle that makes them great. Places like Lavender Town are made by Pokemon Tower, Ekrutuk City is made by the Burnt Tower and the Bell Tower, Hoenn is made by Sky Pillar and Mount Chimney. Even in the later games, Lumiose City is made by the Prism Tower and the Lumiose Museum. Sun and Moon are made by Either Paradise. Buildings hold so much value to me as a player because these places make the region literally inhabitable, and Black and White's buildings are the cream of the crop. Let's begin by starting at the end. This might sound weird, but I still think the best example of how intricate all of the designs of the buildings are in Black and White are exemplified the best at the badge check gates in Victory Road. These are the gates that let you into the final act of the game and check that you've beaten all 8 gym leaders in Unova. Just look at the way some of these gates open and close, and how each of the gates represents something new about each badge that you've collected. Like when you levitate over the gap after you do the 6th bag check gate. It's great. They could have spent absolutely no time on this and just put 8 plain gates that you just pass through, but instead they chose to go above and beyond with the design. It's here and in so many other places where you can see how much effort went into using every single ounce of computing power in the DS. Masuda and Sugimori left a lasting impact on this game's legacy as probably the best looking game that you can purchase for the Nintendo DS. Everything in the DS's firepower was used to render the 3D architecture in this game, and it is all the better for it. Moving on to Victory Road itself, it's just spectacular, probably the most intricate Victory Road that I have ever played through in any Pokemon game. To put it simply, it's a conic section. Okay, I guess that's not really that simple, but it's a mountain face with a maze of tunnels that have you going through different passageways, sliding down hills, and finding hidden items through your journey up this mountain face. And all of this ends in an extremely gorgeous Victory Road pantheon, looking like something out of ancient Greece. Victory Road is special because it's a celebration of everything that makes the rest of Black and White great, which is individuality and cohesion. Black and White carry such a strong sense of oneness from town to town, and it makes the region feel so much more lived in. And I know I hate to use that awful video game review buzzword, but it's honestly true. Each town, city, and building is distinct from the last, and it makes the player feel like there's no limit to what the developers have concocted. and it starts with the buildings in each town and city being so distinct from each other in their designs. Walking between Unova's different cities is such a dramatic shift for people playing this game compared to other Pokemon games for the first time. You go from a mining port town in Driftvale to an airfield in Mistralton to a town in between the mountains in Isserus. Previous games were like, here's a town next to the water, here's a town that looks the exact same as the last one except it's next to a mountain, and here's the exact same town again except it's in a field. And while the layouts of the towns in black and white might be enough, the distinct quality of the buildings in each town from each other also do so much to make each of these places lively and unique. Take Driftvale City, for example. Okay, fine, I'll let you have the obligatory dance break. City is a port town right next to Driftvale Drawbridge, which is a major bridge that blocks a river to the rest of Unova. You also get some additional context from the previous cities that boats often travel in the seas around Unova, both carrying people and cargo. So if people are moving other people and cargo around the region, where does the cargo end up? Enter the cold storage. Besides being a set piece where you fight the evil Team Plasma, it makes sense why it exists here. People need to store their cargo somewhere, and it tracks that in the building you only fight workers here compared to other classes of trainers. Black and White is just full of these grand set pieces. The next town over, Mistralton, is pretty much just an airfield and an air traffic control center with pilots milling about. So it makes sense why there aren't a ton of houses here besides the pilots and the people that live closer to Celestial Tower to the north. And outside of these larger buildings in the airfield and the storage area in these cities, the houses in these cities do have distinct architectural styles from each other. Driftvale's modern houses have green-colored roofs that look oddly similar to the crystals being mined in Clay's gym, while Mistralton's bungalows have distinctly red roofs and are far more modest. You could even bring it back to an earlier town like Nakreen, where the second gym is. There's clearly a defunct railroad that runs through the middle of the town, but the houses next to it look oddly old. I realize that the people who built Nakreen City probably turned these buildings that look like warehouses and converted them into mixed-use housing. And sure enough, after some dialogue with the various NPCs that live in them, these warehouses were turned into studios for artists. Shout out to Mixed Use Development for real, they're really up on their urban design trends. Unova is absolutely chock full of this variety in its architectural design. The houses in Nakreen are different from the houses in Driftvale, are different from the houses in Striaton, down to even the most minute details. The variety between the multiple floors, single-family housing, and industrial buildings all look and are different from each other, because that's what a real-life Pokemon region would look like. And they aren't just all the same house copy and pasted at just a bunch of different times. Unova still has these in small quantities, but it still manages to sell you on these being real-ish places that actual people live in. This problem is a reminiscent of a larger problem with game design and designing virtual worlds, which is that video games with bigger worlds in general have to kind of toe a line between creating a virtual space that feels both real and alive, but also doesn't add so much unnecessary detail that assets and computing power are wasted in spaces where the player is only going to spend 5 minutes and also might not even see all of them. Black and White complete this balancing act so well compared to any other game in the Pokemon franchise. And the ultimate piece of this balancing act is the NPCs usually. They are the people that inhabit these virtual spaces. The more they fit in, the more the player feels like they fit in. And therefore the final piece of the puzzle for Unovan habitats are its gym leaders. In past games, the gym leaders kind of just make the city that they live in. Pewter City in Red and Blue is Brock City. Azalea Town is Bugsy's City. Black and White, this is totally flipped on its head. The gym leaders actually have jobs that they are devoted to, and they are pillars of their community. Skyla, the flying-type gym leader, is a pilot. Berg, the bug-type gym leader, is an accomplished artist, and Lenora, the normal-type specialist, is a museum curator. And all of these professions are beautifully executed in the architectural design of each gym. It's so impressive. The gym design in Black and White is probably the best out of any game in the franchise that I have ever played. A few of my favorites include Lenora's gym that makes you solve puzzles in the gigantic library of the museum where she works at until you have to find a hidden switch in a bookshelf where she's lurking beneath and then eventually tries to beat your ass with a very annoying hypnotizing watchog. And then also Drayden's gym, god damn, where you have to control dragon statues that keep rising higher and higher until you eventually reach the gym leader himself. Even the ice puzzles in Bryson's gym are the best ice puzzles in any Pokemon game in my opinion, which isn't saying a lot because I hate ice puzzles, but these ones are okay. But even more than the gyms themselves, the gym leaders appear as actual pillars of the community. The most literal depiction of this is Drayden, who is openly written about as Opelucid City's mayor, a city that is something out of a futurist, badly rendered Midjourney image of New York City in 100 years. He takes offense when Team Plasma tries to take Opelucid City's Pokémon away from them. And it's his job to take Opelucid City into the future, quote-unquote, and he does this by caring about the people who live in it. And all of this community goes back to the architecture of the gyms and the surrounding towns and the buildings that make each place cohesive. And therefore, the way the people act in these communities makes them feel more tight-knit. Sure, all these qualities exist already, but the buildings lay the foundation for all these elements to be nicely wrapped up. If this shows anything, Pokemon Black and White is a game about people. And it's a lot of people. Masuda knew that hundreds of thousands of people would end up playing his game, and ultimately I think he decided to make a game that reflected these increased numbers. The cities and towns in Black and White are just filled with people being there. And nowhere is this theme of multitudes more apparent than the crown jewel of the Unova region, Castelia City. With a region based on New York, Castelia is the city. You can see it towering in the distance as you cross the Sky Arrow Bridge, and it's spectacular. Skyscrapers loom over you as you trek the city streets filled with people. I think Castelia probably has the most amount of people in a Pokemon city to date, even if you can't talk or have a unique conversation with all of them. But honestly, that doesn't really matter. It's just so lively. You've got dancers in the square, an actual lifelike Game Freak office, and Berg's gym, a honeycomb-structured art gallery filled with bug-type trainers. Besides the hexagonal inspirations for Unova as a whole that Sugimori came up with on his visit to the MoMA, I have to believe that this gym exactly was directly inspired by the MoMA. Like, come on, it's a hexagonal art gallery gym. And the best part of all of this is that all the buildings are not the same architectural style either. Even though the buildings that are made out of glass and metal dominate the skyline of Castelia, you still have other buildings, like this red-colored tea house down a dark alley, the Passerby Analytics HQ that looks like an old Art Deco building, and many more modern buildings that stand out, like the gym itself. The multiplicity of the architecture of Castelia reflects the multiplicity of the people of Castelia, just like the multiplicity of the architecture in Unova reflects the multiplicity of the people of Unova. And it's these people that the evil Team Plasma is trying to make an obedient monolith, and partially through their interactions with the region's architecture. Pokemon Black and White have the best story in all of the Pokemon games. I'm not really leaving this up for debate at the moment, because it's one of the only games that actually makes you think for a little bit instead of mindlessly mashing A. I mean, I still do that, but it's not the point. From the moment that the protagonist and their two companions leave Nuvema Town, you're greeted by Team Plasma, an evil team that looks fairly similar to the previous versions of the evil teams like Team Rocket, Aqua, Magma, and Galactic, until you hear what their whole message is. Instead of doing crime, committing eco-terrorism, or evaporating their reality with the power of Pokemon God, Team Plasma is about liberating Pokemon from their trainers. They claim that Pokemon trainers have abused their Pokemon by using them in battle and mishandling them for centuries, and they're out here to win the hearts and minds of the public to get them to release their Pokemon for the greater good. The leadership of Team Plasma is pretty clear-cut at first. You're approached by the leader of their 7 sages, Getsis, after the initial meeting in Okimlet Town. He's set on achieving Team Plasma's goals, and you run into him pretty much in every city from then on. You also run into this funny-looking green-haired guy, N, who begins to fight you outside of Nacrene City and then becomes your third rival. He believes in Team Plasma's ideals, but never really seems to be in league with them. Until you have an incredibly romantic date on the Ferris wheel in Nimbasa City, hubba hubba, and he's revealed to you that he's the king of Team Plasma. Oh my god, who knew that the most anime protagonist-looking character would be the evil team leader? How could anyone have seen that coming? Oh my god! But you see, the villainy of both Getsis and N are quite different. And the reason why eventually is revealed to you by the end of the game. N's way of the world and Getsis are polar opposites, yet they want to achieve the same goals. And this dichotomy is reflected in the architecture of the surrounding area, where they are at the peak of their powers. N is an ideologue. He's someone that believes in Pokemon liberation above everything else. But he's still a child filled with an innate curiosity, meaning that he will and is interested in listening to others' perspectives. N is in an extended dialogue with you throughout the game, trying to understand why your Pokemon stay with you and why others leave other trainers. These conversations mainly happen in the cities and towns of Unova, arguably the most artificial portions of the region in terms of their age of their architecture. N tells the protagonist that he's the king of Team Plasma on top of the goddamn Ferris wheel, for God's sake. He's in conflict with himself in these moments, and it's only in these moments where he is in the more artificial portions of Unova where he begins to truly question himself. Take the opposite, though, where N is the most sure of himself is in the oldest structures of Unova. In natural formations like Chargestone Cave, he is extremely sure of his beliefs and knows that he is completing the mission of Team Plasma as a righteous journey of Pokemon liberation. Possibly the most important moment in the climax is when N receives Zekrom/Reshiram in Dragon Spiral Tower. Dragon Spiral Tower is the oldest building in the Unova region, as you find out from the people that keep it safe. You begin at the bottom of this crumbling ruin, but there's still level after level for you to climb while defeating Team Plasma's grunts. And at the top you realize you're simply too late. N is at the peak of his powers here. He's here with the legendary Pokemon of old, surrounded by his followers, while the common people of Unova can do nothing but watch in awe as he takes flight on the legendary dragon. But through it all, one person is behind him, sniveling, conniving, manipulating him from the shadows. In contrast with almost the entirety of the story makeup of Black and White that is more in-depth and poses moral questions, Ghetsis is the most cartoonishly evil villain that I think the series has. While other evil team leaders on other Pokemon games like Cyrus and Lysander are just nihilistic and hell-bent on destroying the world, and others like Giovanni just want to do crime and get away with it, Ghetsis stands apart by wanting to take over the entire region with a legion of surrendered Pokemon. By puppeteering N, he wields the themes of the old ways, but molds himself into the new just as easily. And like I've been saying, the architecture follows him and his themes throughout the game. Ghetsis, in his essence, is an artificial person, and he fits into the most artificial spaces of Unova throughout the game. Think about where your encounters with Ghetsis hold the most weight. At the beginning of the game, proclaiming the wonders of Pokemon liberation in the square of Accumula Town. Here, protecting his fellow Team Plasma members in Castelia and Driftvale City. Here, where he stares you down extremely menacingly from all the way across the two-blind bridge leading to Opelucid City. But I can't talk about architecture in the Unova region without talking about the most impressive spectacle of a building that I have ever seen in a Pokemon game. Meandering down Victory Road, facing the Elite Four, it's all been a cakewalk so far. You press a button on the statue, descend down and then up a gigantic flight of stairs, and then look upon N defeating the champion Alder in dramatic fashion. And then all of a sudden, N summons a gigantic castle from beneath the earth, shaking the very foundation of Victory Road in the Champions Hall. It surrounds the building and starts ejecting massive staircases made of stone that slam into the hall where Ed made good on his promises to take over the Pokemon League and become Unova's champion. The building is massive, lined with gilded and marble accents reminiscent of a malformed, mutated, twisted palace of Versailles. It spans multiple floors, houses a host of Team Plasma's grunts, and is truly spectacular in scale. But while N is the king of Team Plasma and has reached the highest heights that Unova can possibly offer him, it's still Ghetsis who ultimately controls Team Plasma's fate. As you climb the floors of N's castle, you come across a child's playroom. Some conversations with the nurses who work there confirm that it is N's room. N's room? There is no way that the chosen hero of Unova, N, had grown up with a cushioned lifestyle like this. No, he grew up in the wilds with Pokemon. They raised him from nothing. He is the chosen one for both Pokemon and for humans. These are not like the stories I'd heard when he was raised by wild Pokemon, and yet the nurses confirm my suspicion. N was never meant to be Team Plasma's champion. He was meant to be Unova's. And after a final battle with N and U that shakes his confidence and forces him to give up, Ghetsis ultimately rejects him, tosses him aside like trash, and shows his true colors. He has been manipulating N this entire time to grow an army of Pokemon that will carry out his will. He never wanted to set them free, just like he never wanted to set N free and treat him like a son of his own. Like Dragon Spiral Tower, N is a person steeped in tradition with bold ideals. Like N's castle, Ghetsis is a force in the shadows, but is colossal and overpowering once he's been able to reveal himself. N and Ghetsis are just the old ways clashing with the new ways while constantly trying to be friendly on the surface. just like Unova's architecture is a blend of old and new constantly in conversation with each other. Except their story is a story of discordance, and Unova's story is a story of harmony. Ghetsis' worldview of all people under one tyrannical force ultimately fails thanks to you, and thanks to the people of the Unova region. As N learns, they care about Pokemon more than he knows, and the people and the world they've built teaches him that lesson. It's a place where people are free to be themselves, no matter what town or city they may live in. They are many, but they are also one. Pokemon Black and White, whether people understood it at the time or not, set the standard for Pokemon games for 10 years, even up until now. Story, graphics, Pokemon design, region design, the list goes on. So what stories did Game Freak tell next? Well, I'm sorry to say that if Black and White are the 100 Years of Solitude of the world, the next few entries into the Pokemon franchise aren't really cracking the picture book ranks yet. It's not to say that we haven't had some cool moments in the remaining sequels. Lumiose City and X and Y arguably exceeds Castelia in terms of having a well-made metropolis for players to trot through. Sun and Moon had lots of beautiful natural environments and a shockingly contrasting Aether Paradise. Even Sword and Shield had some cool quirks that I missed on a first playthrough, mainly that the stadiums are supposed to be the soccer stadiums that go along with the overall British theme of the region. But man, am I disappointed. At the end of the day, Pokemon games haven't gotten back to the point of having a region that actually feels like a cohesive and real place. Scarlet and Violet set the franchise so far back that I don't even know where to begin. The cities look kinda cool from the outside if you could parse through the millions of visual bugs. The gym missions are there, I guess. They're far removed from the gym designs that were in Gen 5, and are there kinda just as an annoyance until you get to the actual battle. And what's even worse is that you can't go into any of the goddamn buildings! Like, at the bare minimum, I thought we'd be able to see a blank room with a shop attendant selling wares in a random town. But nope, you get a transition screen and then a wall of text to buy things from. Maybe all of the graphical/interior design work went into designing the stupid school or the surprisingly okay Area Zero. But you're telling me nothing went into any of the building designs? Like, half the reason that Pokemon regions like Unova are so explorable is because you can actually go into the buildings. There is little distinction between any of the towns in Scarlet and Violet besides where they are physically located. Even with the Pokécenters, which are now stripped down to kiosks on the side of the road, they're supposed to be the common meeting place of everyone involved with Pokemon, and now Game Freak has stolen the magic from them as well. I think the ultimate test for a Pokemon game is its Elite Four. Alright, give me a second to headbang for a sec. Okay, I'm done now. I'm not trying to say that you need to have the most intricately designed rooms for just the 4-battle series, but it's one of the last times you're battling anyone, theoretically. Pull out all the stops. Black and White's Elite Four is a masterclass in atmosphere. Chantal, the Ghost-type gym leader, having a phantom picking you up and lifting you up around the column to her arena. Grimsley, the Dark-type gym leader, corralling the player on a conveyor belt looking like a torture device as he brings you to get smacked by his crocodile. The same creativity goes for Caitlin and Marshall, the psychic and fighting-type Elite Four members. You, the player, know how much these battles mean to your journey. The Black and White Elite Four recognizes how far you've come and builds arenas and challenges to match that level of effort and scale. Scarlet and Violet saw this level of effort and said, yeah, here's an empty room with like no details in it or decorations or anything. This is just where you fight these 4 battles. It takes the emphasis away from these fights and normalizes them. Like, I'm aware that there are other quest lines in this game that give more of a final battle energy, but come on, man, it's the Elite fucking Four. Like, it's... I feel like in the same way that Scarlet and Violet has gotten so bad in terms of its effort and its design and just general level of detail, kind of mirror the way that modern architectural trends in real life are going. The only new architectural building spaces that we get are either some of the most boring, generic buildings made by humans, or buildings that are pretty to look at but unbearable to physically be in. Take Moynihan Train Hall for a moment. It's a multi-million-dollar development project for arguably the biggest train station in the largest city in America. It looks really nice, but oops, no seats in the main hall because the city hates unhoused people. Gigantic chopstick building blocking the main view from Washington Square Park of the Empire State Building that only houses luxury apartments. Why not? Most modern architects and real estate holders are simply too shackled to extracting every single dollar out of every single piece of square footage of a building to stop and think about what the people who might live or work in it will actually feel. Just like how Game Freak, at this point, is simply focused on extracting every dollar that they can from their massive player base just to keep the economic engine going. Pokemon is still, like I said in the beginning of the video, the most valuable franchise on Earth. People haven't stopped buying their games, so they've kind of gotten lazy, and it's, at this point, embarrassing. I get the question a lot from my family members and friends that if I think video games are art. And I feel like my answer to this question has really morphed over the years. Obviously, it's an artistic achievement, but it's really difficult to compare things like the Mona Lisa in a game like Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. I like going to places like the MoMA to try to challenge my opinions about games, and whether they're like everyday art. And honestly, I'm not sure. My opinions change like the seasons, I guess, much like the seasons in Pokemon Black and White, but I think games are more akin to architecture more than anything else. Music, visual art, and movies incorporate more intent and feeling of the creator than anything else when they present it to the consumer. But games always must account for the space that the player takes up, because it's their enjoyment and how they play the game that makes the game they are playing worth playing. I think games are a lot like buildings. They can be beautiful, they can be gorgeous, they can even be mystifying, but they have to include space for people to be in. More developers than ever are creating space for new experiences and new players to appreciate their hard work. And these new experiences are often trying to just recapture an ounce of these developers' favorite titles when they were young and picked up a DS or an Xbox or a Game Boy for the first time. I just hope that Game Freak can remember that they used to inspire people like that too.